All right. I almost, well, they almost have it right. I always have it right. They almost have it. No, I'm just kidding. Welcome, everybody. My name is Mike Nelson. I'm going to be talking a little bit about Azure Cloud Shell. You're going to learn it in about 12 minutes. This is awesome that we have people at VMworld, right? Not VMware Explorer, that actually want to learn about Azure Cloud Shell. I'm actually a Microsoft and a Azure person. I'm also a VMware person, but there's really only two things you need to know about me on this slide: how to get a hold of me, and that I love beer, barbecue, and gadgets. Everything else doesn't matter. Okay, just those two things. This is the other important thing. Everything that I produce, it goes into my GitHub repo. So if you want to take a snapshot of that, you can download everything. This presentation, all the code and everything's already been uploaded. Okay, 3, 2, 1, hurry up, get it. I don't have that much time. Come on, let's go. Okay. All right, so simple enough. Cloud Shell. Anybody use Cloud Shell right now, by the way? Nobody's ever touched it? Kind of touched it? A little bit? Played around with it a little bit? Okay, cool. So Cloud Shell basically is just a Microsoft managed CLI shell. So everybody's kind of used to going into Azure and using this nice little pretty portal that has blades that slide back and forth, and you can do checkboxes and all that kind of fun stuff. This is the way to do it via CLI. And you basically can do more in Cloud Shell than you can do in the portal. Okay? So this is the definition of it, my definition of it really. It just basically provides you a CLI to administer Azure, is what it does. These are really the facts about it. It is a container, all right? It's running it's not exactly a Kubernetes container, it's an AKS container, but it's a Microsoft specialized one. It is shell as a service, okay? So it's got about 40 plus apps and languages that are embedded in it and are constantly updated by Microsoft. You can actually update them inside of your shell if it doesn't require the root permissions, because you do not have root, okay? It uses something called the Monaco editor, which is like if you use VS Code. VS Code it's like a mini-me. It's a stripped down version. And in the demo, you'll see it. It has a 20-minute timeout. All right, so this is not meant to be something that you stay in all day and you administer and you do everything inside of. This is something that you go into, you do the work you need to do, and then you get out. You get one per user account, regardless of the region. Okay, you must have an Azure file share access, which everybody does. It's based on Linux permissions, okay, as a user, not root. That's exactly what I said before in the permissions. You're based on a user, not as root. Anybody understand what root is? It's like God, like admin, enterprise admin, domain admin. And it's free, okay? It's absolutely free, but the storage, okay, is not. And you do have the ability to store things inside of the shell, all right? You have a 5 gig storage that you can put in there, okay? So that's all I'm going to show you for slides. This is how to get a hold of me once again, if you need to get a hold of me for any reason at all. Okay, and now I'm going to start the demo. I'm going to try and pause this. I don't know if it's going to work because it kind of goes fast in the beginning. The first thing it's going to show is it's going to show all the different interfaces that you can use to use Cloud Shell. There's I counted 8 so far. There's 8 different ways to use Cloud Shell. Okay, you can use it in, and I'll start the demo here. First off is the browser. You go to the portal, you click on that little icon, that starts Cloud Shell. Okay? You can start a new tab and go to shell.azure.com. Enter your credentials, that starts a full screen shell. You can also do something, you can see I'm using 2 shells. I can go back and forth. This is called the Azure App. This is what I want to try and pause, and I don't know if it'll let me pause that. Did it? Awesome. Oh, no, it didn't. Well, that was the Azure App, which you can download. This is Windows Terminal. Windows Terminal, you can actually run Azure Cloud Shell inside of Windows Terminal, if you're familiar with that. This is VS Code. VS Code actually has Azure Cloud Shell built in natively. You have the Azure activities that you can do, but you can actually bring up Azure Cloud Shell, connect to it, and it'll bring up a shell for you. It also has a mobile app. So you can actually go into an Azure mobile app and start a Cloud Shell. Would you want to do that? If you look at the screen, when I do an AZ command, which is the Azure commands, yeah, it's kind of convoluted, right? It'd be really hard. But if you had to do it in a pinch, you know, it's really kind of a lifesaver. You can also do it inside of a Docker container. So you can run a Docker container that actually is a Cloud Shell, and you can see I'm actually in the Cloud Shell here inside of a container. And I'm working inside of the container, which is talking back to Azure. So all these different ways that you can run Cloud Shell. And now I'm clearing the screen. This is where I'm actually changing it from a PowerShell to a Bash. And I'll show that in just a moment. You can run both PowerShell and Bash in Cloud Shell. If you're not familiar with Bash, Bash is actually the Linux command line. So in the web GUI, which I'll work in, you can switch between PowerShell and Bash. Or you can just type Bash, and you'll get a Bash prompt. And you can work like you're in Linux. Do an exit, you're back to PowerShell again. That's simple. Or you can click on the Bash, it'll kick the whole thing over and say, do you want to restart? You can restart the Cloud Shell, help, settings, change the text size, you can change the font, reset the user settings, which clears the slate, and provide feedback if you do that. You can also upload and download files. If you want to upload files into that 5 gig share I said you have. You can upload files, you can work with them, you can download files, okay, and you can manage that file share. All within the Cloud Shell. When you manage the file share, it actually brings you out into your Azure environment, and this is where it's stored. This is your actual storage area, and this is the IMG. This is the image file. This is a mountable disk image. Okay, you can download that IMG file and mount it locally, and you will have a Cloud Shell locally. It's just a Linux box. That's all it is. So I'm back on the screen right now. This is actually, you can open a separate session. The cool thing about this is that I'm actually running 2 sessions. I'm running in here. I'm doing I flip back. I'm in here in a PowerShell session. I'm switching over to Bash. Any running processes in active PowerShell will go in the background. So here I'm running Bash. In the second session, I'm running PowerShell. And they're all working in the same container, same files, same everything. So I can be working in Linux and PowerShell at the same time. It also has the Monaco editor. Look familiar, kind of like VS Code. You bring up a file to edit. Looks just like VS Code, even with the mapping on the right-hand side. You right-click. This is where you can do cut, copy, save, quit, and you even have a command palette. That's kind of cool. Now, it also has something called the web preview. That's if you're working with like Node.js or you're writing web apps, it'll actually open up a web preview for you, and you can actually see the work that you're doing if you're working in those languages. So here I'm going to switch to Bash, and I'm going to do something, and what I'm going to do here is, some folks will want to say, hey, what is this thing actually doing? Well, I try and run a command called system info, and it's saying, can't do that, but it does exist. Well, in Linux, which I'm in Bash, you actually have to do it a little bit different. I'm trying to do a // In PowerShell, what do we call that? Anybody know? Okay. If you're in PowerShell, okay, when we start something, you always have to do a // not a // Okay? And here you can see I bring up all the information. It's actually a Microsoft kernel. I even bring up the private and public IP, memory usage, CPU usage, and the file system. So if I change directories, I can actually go back to my home directory just by doing a cd tilde. Home directory is where all of your personal files, everything you uploaded, everything that you work with is in your home directory. Like I said, it's just a Linux box. That's all it is. Switching back again, requesting a new shell, this time in PowerShell. I went from Bash back to PowerShell. This is where your cloud drive is. That's the drive I'm talking about, your home directory. It's called the cloud drive. This tells you everything about your cloud drive, where the storage account is, the subscription ID, resource group it's under, and even the mount point. So if you're familiar with Azure Storage, you know this information, it's really easy. I do a dir on that, it tells me all my files. Okay? I do something called I cd into something called Azure. That's kind of cool. I get an Azure prompt. So I want to do a dir on that, or an ls, which is Linux. I get the same thing, but I do a dir, and what do I get? That's all my subscription information. So this actually allows me to go into my subscription information and actually go in my resources, into my storage, into my resource groups, into everything, just by transforming into another drive inside of Cloud Shell. It's really kind of cool. Connecting once again. Switching over to Bash. See how quickly that switches between PowerShell and Bash. This is actually a thing I'm doing really quick. A lot of folks will write things and they'll want to know how to get the external IP. How do I connect to Cloud Shell to be an external IP rather than going internal? You know, so you can actually run this command, okay, which is in the files in my GitHub repo, and it'll, you know, it's doing a big Linux command, a sed command, and it'll tell you what the IP is once I finish. It'll tell you what the public IP is, or you can just run the system info script, which I also have included, which basically gives you the private IP and then also the public IP. Here you can see the different things that you can run. Terraform built in. You do a Terraform version. There it is. You can run things like Git. Git's included. Who runs Kubernetes? Kubernetes is also included, as you can see. Python, if I spelled it right the first time, which I didn't. Second time, this is last night, by the way, folks. I had to record this. Python comes up. And then M365. Anybody who works with Office 365? It actually has built in the M365 APIs. So you can run the full M365 APIs right inside of Cloud Shell. And that is it for the demonstration. I encourage you to try out Cloud Shell if you have an Azure account, or if you have the trial, okay, which you can get for free. You know, just click on that little icon and give it a shot. If you have any questions, please let me know.